Welcome to the MindSpeaking podcast, where we talk about the human side of data. In other words, data, communication, and personal development. My name is Gilbert Eikelenboom. I'm driven by curiosity, and my aim is to spread insights that you can apply in your life starting today. So, let's do it. Let's start MindSpeaking. Today on the podcast, I speak with George Firican. He's an award-winning data governance leader. He is the founder of Lights on Data and also the podcast host of the Lights on Data show. He also has a YouTube channel and he has a lot of expertise in data governance, data management, and BI. But we're not only gonna talk about the business stuff today, the professional stuff. It turned out to be a very personal conversation between George and I. We talked about introversion, how to become more outgoing, dealing with stakeholders, and also tips for public speaking. A lot of tips, a lot of experiences of George, who's an introvert himself. Also, we spoke about travel, what travel can do for you on a personal and professional level, and a lot of practical tips on data governance and data management. So tips how you can improve and what type of templates he uses for improving and taking the next steps. So as said, it turned out to be a very personal interaction, a very personal conversation, flowing left and right, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope you also enjoy the conversation with George Firican. Hi George, great to see you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited for the conversation. We had a bunch of LinkedIn chat conversations already, and we spoke one time in person, at least live.
Yes.
Via the internet.
Yes, and of course, I have a book, your book as well, which is, a great read that I recommend to everybody. So thank you again for this.
Thank you for bringing that to the attention. And I'm so much looking forward to diving into your expertise in data and all the things you've done as a professional. But the MindSpeaking podcast is also about the personal stuff. So understanding where you came from and what type of personal development you've experienced in the past. So tell us about George. Who was George in the history when he was a little kid, and where was George?
George, as a little kid, was born in Romania. So this is in Eastern Europe. And I was born in the 80s, and the 80s in Romania was maybe like the 70s in the United States or North America. So I grew up with things like, the A-Team and MASH and like all these old-timer sitcom episodes, which was really fun because then I felt coming to North America when I was a teenager, I could relate more to adults because we had so much more in common than I did with the people my age. And that was quite in a way a shock. I was felt uprooted from what I knew, how I grew up in Romania, but at the same time I always wanted to go to North America, and it wasn't my choice. It was my parents that dragged me there. I was 14, 15 when I came to Canada, and that was definitely an interesting experience, and I felt it really changed me, and in a way for the better too. It gave me more confidence because I was, thrown in a whole new world, new people, new friends to make. But that made me maybe up my game on my social skills and communications and try and be a little bit more outgoing because I'm an introvert. So that doesn't come easy to me. Right. That helped a change.
Right. That's so interesting how that move also changed you as a person, right? And talk to us about that development. You say you try to be a bit more outgoing and social and work on your communication skills. How did that go? Talk to us about that.
It went well. I mean, I think you have to. We're social beings, so we need to, have our own group of friends to survive. That's how I always felt. And in Romania, it was easy because you're put in a classroom, you're sitting with the same 30 kids for, 5 years, 8 years, depending on the class structure. And inevitably, you get to know them. It's easy. It comes easy. But then when you're older and you're put into a new situation, you have to make that first step. You can't just expect people to come in and like, oh, there's a new kid in the classroom. Let's, he's going to be our best friend. So I think you need to put your best foot forward and try and be a little bit more outgoing if you're not. If you're just sitting in your corner quiet and you're just expecting people to come in and talk to you, you're not going to be, succeeding all the time. So at times you need to make that first step and go in and say hello and ask how they are, and ask about their hobbies, and be the one that initiates some of these conversations. So with that, I think it went well, though I feel in a way I've discovered one thing. First, the first reaction was to try and be close to the people that I thought were like me, so Romanians. Okay, where are the Romanians in the classrooms or in the school? And then I figure out after a while, I was like, okay, well, that's not a good, method of, that's not a good criteria of, okay, that's going to be a good friend. Because then you realize, the people, even though they're Romanian, if I would have been in Romania, I would have never been friends with them. So after a while, you realize that, well, no, that's not what I'm looking for in a friend. There are all these other characteristics. And, you find you're in a multicultural group, which is amazing because you're learning so much more about other views and other cultures and other upbringings that are not related to your own. But with those conversations, with those stories that you're sharing, you're feeling like you're growing yourself because you're living through them and through their stories. So I feel you as a person, you're growing a little bit because of that too. You're learning from their experiences. And then you also find out, no matter where people come from in this world, no matter what religion or beliefs they have, you find the same people everywhere. There's a there's a good guy here, there's an amazing girl there in terms of their personality traits.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear about your perspective on that, because I totally agree with you that if you go abroad and you put yourself in a different perspective, you learn so much about other people and how their views or their experiences are different. And at the same time, they might be very similar as well, but you need to look a bit beyond what you see at first.
Mm-hmm.
And was language a barrier for you?
I knew English. It wasn't, at that perfect level, but I thought I was fairly okay. Still kept the accent even now, maybe because I came here at a later age, or maybe I'm just not that proficient in languages and I couldn't adopt the local accent. I'm not sure why. But there were definitely, different intricacies that I wouldn't get, and it took me a while, and, different sayings and like fingers crossed, it seems like such a little thing, but for example in Romania we tend to keep our fists closed as a sign of good luck, and keeping your fingers crossed is like, okay, well, this is sort of the opposite.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so sign language or gestures are so different, right? Because I know also in many Western countries, thumbs up is a good thing, or making a circle with your index finger and your thumb.
Mm-hmm.
But I know in the Middle East it means very different things.
Right.
It's extremely offensive.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating to hear about that.
Right.
And you also mentioned that you need to get out of your comfort zone, right? You need to move first and work on your communication when you move to North America.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that impacted your YouTube career, so to say? Because you have a successful YouTube channel and you love creating videos and putting that creativity in there. And it requires a lot of confidence and getting out of your comfort zone to create those and put them online. So do you see any link there?
Yeah, great question. I never thought about that relationship, and maybe it's definitely I'm more outgoing than when I was a kid. So I think it all plays a role, and it probably did influence. And you're right, to put yourself in front of a camera. I mean, even now, I think 10 years ago, it would have been a lot harder for me to do this than it is now. And I was just, very comfortable. It's like a conversation between friends. And I'm sure it's because of you, Gilbert, as well, because you're such an easy person to talk to. But at the same time, one has to get used to talking in a way in front of a camera. For some reason, there's like a mental blockage when you see that red light blinking and you see that camera in front of you. It's just different. sometimes it felt even harder than talking to a group of people that you've never known before. So being up on a stage and delivering a speech seemed easier than turning on the camera and talking in front of a camera. So that got a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah, I can relate to that. In the beginning, it's very strange because you talk to this camera and you're supposed to look straight into the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you're used to looking at faces, or at least even if you have a big audience, you see people in front of you. And if you're recording or giving a big presentation, you're just speaking, pretending or hoping that other people on the other side are listening.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to what you're saying.
You know, what I did initially in the first few tries, I had to put a Post-it with a happy face, smiling face behind the camera so I could see something that would make me smile a little bit. Just because I still have that. Oh, you do?
I still have that, yeah. It reminds me to not be too serious, you know, because it's kind of if I get very much into the content, I tend to be a bit serious, and it's hard for people to relate to or to be energetic when you're looking at a very serious person.
Right. And that's another thing about the energy. I feel when you're recording, you feel like you have a high energy level, but then on the camera, out on the recording, while you're watching the playback, it seems like you're lower energy. So I feel like you have to be even higher and, you know, go even bigger in terms of your vocal variety and everything else that goes in it. Like you got to have that high energy, and that gets mellowed down somehow.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying, and I'm wondering, do you have any tips for people like me or other introverts who need to speak to a camera a lot? If you don't have a YouTube channel, you need to you're in meetings, right, at work. So do you have any tips how we can improve that?
Well, this might be a cliche, but it does help to practice. So even if you open your own Zoom and you click record, you'll see that initially it's not easy, even though you know it's nobody else on the other side. It's not easy to just talk into the void. But if you do this a few times, it gets easier. It does get easier. Maybe it also helps in a meeting if you don't have your camera on from the beginning, though I don't recommend it. I mean, it's always, we're losing so much already by having these virtual conversations and not in-person conversations. It's great to see the other person and their reaction, but maybe if you feel it's easier for you to just get things started with the camera off, if that makes you more comfortable, maybe try and do that. And then, you know, when you're ready, turn that on. Just you know, ease into it a little bit.
Right. Do you remember creating your first YouTube videos?
I do. And Gilbert, I think for the first one, I had this like, you know, over professional setting at somebody's house. They had all the lights and I had 2 cameras, angles and everything. It was like overproducing it. But it's because I like to do good things, quote unquote, you know, looking professionally. And I think for a 5-minute video, it took me 2 hours to record it. I kept on repeating it and, you know, practicing it, and things wouldn't work out, and it was painful. Yeah.
Yeah, but I bet you learned a lot.
I did.
The first few.
I did.
I think it's something that many people do that start out. The first videos need to be perfect, and eventually you also learn that, you know, it's about practicing and putting in the hours, and of course it's good to have good lighting, good cameras, but in the end it's about the delivery and trying it out.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the sound, the quality of the sound is quite important, more important than the video quality, I found.
Right, that's a good tip. And I'm also wondering, because YouTube and content creation on LinkedIn or any other platform is quite a creative side, I would say. And data management, the part that your professional life resides in mostly, is more analytical, I would say. How do you see those fields combining, or do you see that you're combining those 2 fields right now? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're completely right. I think within data governance, data management, I'm missing a little bit of my creative side, which I like to exert, and maybe that's why I like to create content and put content out there on social media and create courses and videos and things like that. So I have that outlet. But maybe the one area that I can think of, especially in data governance when it comes to creativity, is the whole communication and change management piece. Because you need to find at times some creative ways of communicating what you have done, what you're doing, what you're going to do, and how that's going to impact people. And you can't just put everything in one email or one newsletter and just put it out there. Sometimes it helps to create some sort of a graphic. Just think of a interesting contest or a way for people to engage with what you've created, just to try and create that adoption. So maybe sometimes that's hard to do because there's all these different types of audience and one thing doesn't work for everybody. So that's why you need to try different methods of putting your content out there and your message out there for people to read, to understand, to start to adopt.
Right. And that's a good bridge to your professional life, to data management. I once heard you say on a podcast that you mentioned data management is a kind of a dry topic that no one wants to talk about, but you want to talk about, and I think you can talk about it in a very clear and enthusiastic way that makes me enthusiastic as well about the topic, even though I'm not very knowledgeable on it. So why do you want to talk about it? What makes you passionate about the subject?
Oh, listen, I think we can talk about this for hours, but I think it's such an important thing and often so overlooked. A lot of companies, a lot of individuals, they're blinded by, not in a bad way, but they're drawn to data science, AI, machine learning, all these fun things that you can do with data visualization. It's all the outputs, all that value that you're drawing out of that data, which is great. But then you can't really have good outcomes if you don't have good data. And you can't have good data. And by good data, I mean good data quality and standardized data and described data, defined data, governed data. So you can't have all of that if you don't have data governance, if you don't have data management in place. So I think Scott Taylor, had this keynote and he talked about imagining a baker that makes this wonderful bread, which people love, and he loves the process as well, and people love the bread that he's making. But if he wouldn't have great ingredients, and somebody else before him, like the farmers and everybody, wouldn't make those quality ingredients, then he wouldn't have that good quality bread and products that he's baking. So I think the same with data as well. You need that data management and you need that data governance to make sure that it is standardized, it is of the quality that's meeting those business requirements, that somebody looks over it and making sure that if there's any changes, then those changes will be accounted for in the data. So, and of course, you're respecting all the policies, regulations. You're not going to get any fines because of it.
Right. And then, because everyone wants to bake the best bread, right? And everyone is pretty focused, including myself, on the last part. Putting it in the oven or presenting it to the customers. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned about using data as an asset, right? Handling it as an asset. What does that mean to you? And I'm sure it's related to what you just said. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so more and more, I think companies are starting to realize that you can actually put a value next to your data. Your data can be on that financial ledger. It is an asset that it has a return on investment when we're using it, sometimes even when we're storing it. So similar to how us as people, we are assets of a company, same as how we have the financial assets that are also assets. In that same way, how we have HR managing people within a company and we have the finance department managing the financial assets. Well, in that same way, we have data governance that's managing data as another asset of the company.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, that comparison. And I think for many people, the HR part and the finance part is logical, right? It's installed in the business.
Yeah. So thinking about it this way, right? When you're working with HR, you as a manager, let's say you're doing some HR related activities. So you might be you're still interviewing the person for the role in your team because you would be the most knowledgeable on who to hire, not HR, right? You're giving the performance reviews, you're giving recommendations for a salary raise, you're giving your input on how that job description should be created, and so many things and so on. You're approving the vacation time, and there's so many processes and things that you're doing as a manager, but you wouldn't be able to do them properly without HR. So HR is providing you, well, George, this is the policy that we need to abide by. That person needs to have at least 4 weeks vacation a year. It's not up to you. Here are the standards and the processes and the steps for you to interview or hire somebody or offer them a salary. And these are the guidelines. You can't offer them more than this. And all of these things are put together by HR. And you're using all those artifacts that HR is putting together because otherwise anybody in the company would do different things. It would not be consistent. It would be, a lot of people that would be unhappy, and probably a lot of lawsuits happening if we wouldn't follow the same rules and regulations and standards and processes that HR is putting together. And same for data governance. So data governance putting together the policies, procedures, processes, standards for data to be managed. And then you can still have one department taking care of their own data, or multiple departments taking care of the same data together, but following these common standards, policies, rules, procedures.
That makes sense. And I think there are many companies and organizations that have heard of data management, data governance, but don't really know where to start or where to continue. Maybe they've heard of it, there's some awareness, they know it's important, but they don't really know how to proceed. Do you have any advice? I know you have some templates on next to your course. You also have some templates. Can you tell us a bit more about what steps people can take to start with this?
I think as with anything, first you need to see where you stand. You need to have that as-is analysis and see where are you today. And it's great to always take that baseline, because then you also want to just compare your progress against that baseline. And so often, at least in the IT world, we forget to do that. We're just so eager to, okay, let's just improve whatever we have right now. Let's just make it better. But then we forget where we are, and then we can't really show that progress anymore. So that's the first step. I think we need to do that as-is analysis, see what are the current issues that we're facing with our data. How does that impact our processes, our business, the bottom line, the goals of the organization? How is it impeding those goals? And I recommend, again, looking from a data perspective, and from that data perspective to look at the acquisition of data, the maintenance of data, and that dissemination of data. So in all those three streams, to see where are the issues, where are the stakeholders impacted by it, where are the processes impacted by it, what are the projects that can be done or they are being done not as easy if we don't have this data governance piece. So that's definitely the first step. And then you want to get that adoption from higher management. You need that sponsor. You need somebody that roots you and also finances your program. And then you want to start some sort of a data governance council, I call it, which is a group of high-level individuals, usually VPs or even CXOs, that come in as a voice of the company, and they dictate it. They tell you, this is what's important for the company. This is what you should focus right now, because we have limited resources, so we can't tackle everything at once. But focus on this, ABC things to start. And then the data governance lead, whoever that person would be, would choose, okay, I know I need to focus on ABC, but it's up to me on how I do that, following best practices and their experience and things like that.
Right, that makes sense. And you also mentioned getting executive buy-in, right, or getting the right funds in.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, what is the role of data or of communication in data management and data governance? And do you see a role in that piece, or how do you see it in the broader perspective?
I think communication plays a huge role. I was at a conference a few years ago, and somebody was saying that communication plays 90% of the role in data governance. Maybe that's a bit much, but I still think it's like very high. It definitely has a very high emphasis. And often I feel like it's missed. Like this, things are getting done and they're not being communicated. And this is not good at all. It has no good outcome. So I'm proponent of over communication sometimes. I feel that we can communicate a lot and then have people, kind of pick and choose what's relevant to them. But I feel it's better to over communicate than under communicate, if that makes sense. And
it does, yeah.
I always try and communicate what we have done, what we are doing, and what we are going to do. And again, I try and relate that to those business goals, or a specific department's goals, or even a specific individual's needs. So try and make that relevant to whoever the audience would be. And sometimes it's hard to tackle all of these things at once.
Right. And how do you discover those needs, those individuals' needs, or how do you understand the business goals? Because before you can relate it to those goals, to them,
yeah,
you need to understand their perspective, right? What is your view on how you can get that?
Well, it's a whole process, but it does start with that as-is assessment initially, because as part of that as-is assessment, you're starting to have a lot of interviews or conversations with the different stakeholders that are being impacted. And through these conversations, you're basically drawing out, okay, what's bothering you right now? And you're really making a list and keeping track of those issues. So then you try and relate, okay, well, how does what I'm doing right now maybe is fixing that issue or addressing that issue? So you're communicating that back to those stakeholders. So that's definitely one way. But I think you also need to be in constant communication with these individuals. You need to have regular status updates, but not just a one-way directional status updates. And you are actually having a conversation, or always listening to their needs. I think that's also key. As part of the communication, we're not just expecting to talk, but a lot to listen. So then we can always show that relationship between what you are doing to how it affects them.
Right. That makes total sense. And I think no matter where you work, in what type of field, we need to listen more and ask better questions. I think it's also so important in the data science field, data analytics, that I know a bit better than data governance, data management. But I see a lot of parallels also, that often it's not communicated enough, right? And what I see with data analysts and data scientists is that they like the work, they like doing the work, right? Doing the analysis, making a model, instead of communicating and aligning with stakeholders and understanding their perspective. And what I think is that also something else is at play, is that many people in data are more introverted. So they prefer working by themselves or with other data professionals instead of being in meetings, big meetings with stakeholders. Do you see the same dynamic in data management, or what's your perspective?
That's a good point. Yes, I do see that. Yeah, you're right. I think it's data overall. People like to just do the work and get to the bottom of it, not interact as much to others, especially from the business side. And what I find is challenging for us, for them, and by us and them I mean introverts in general. I find that when we're communicating to the business side, a lot of individuals from the business side tend to be extroverts. And maybe I'm generalizing things here, but often I find that we're talking to extroverts. And for an introvert, I feel it's takes a lot out of you, takes a lot of energy. And we also want to make sure that they're not going to dominate that conversation, and it's actually going to be a conversation and not just coming from them. So you also get a chance to ask those questions and answer and give your perspective too. So I think that's the challenge with introverts or people working in data.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that as well. You right now, because we talk about being an introvert, but right now you do a lot of public speaking, right? Are you still nervous? Do you have any rituals or mental prep before you go live, do a live stream or a big presentation?
I know you do, and we can talk about that too. Great question. And I know when you posted this on LinkedIn, I was, thinking, well, what do I do? And I don't do much, to be honest. So I'm want to make sure that I, practice before, so I know my material. It's always easier if I know it going in, and I know what I'm going to talk about and how I'm going to talk about it. And there's, different lines or key points that I want to make sure I'm going to address. I also want to make sure I'm not over preparing, so I'm not memorizing that content, because then it just sounds robotic and it's even more stressful. But then I think just on the day of, a few minutes before, 10, 15 minutes before, want to make sure I have my water, my coffee, just to get that, extra hype from the coffee, from the caffeine. And I don't know. No, I'm just generally excited. I'm starting to get into that energy, and I feel that I can. And especially once it starts, I'm like, high energy, very excited, no nerves, or maybe there are still nerves. Somebody told me there was this speaker that I talked to at one point, and she was, traveling the world speaking to audiences, and she was getting paid for it. And I asked her the same question, Gilbert, do you still get nervous? And she said, yes, every time. But I try to channel those butterflies that I feel in my stomach. I try and channel that in my voice and to, push it out of me. And it really helps and energizes the whole speech. And I'm like, okay, I'll try and do that. And couldn't quite figure out what she meant. But I think now I do. I feel like that nervousness, I'm trying to put it in just an energetic voice out there, if that makes any sense.
That makes total sense. I once heard you need to transform, you need to label your nerves as excitement and transform it into excitement, because that's what you are, right? You're not nervous or nervous to fail. You're excited to perform and to tell your story. And I think that clicked something for me. I try to do the same, so I can see what she was trying to say. I think it's a similar thing, and for me, and I think many people can relate to this, I wanted to, I focused a lot on the content, on what I wanted to say, and not memorizing everything, but still was very focused on it needs to be correct, or needs to be right what I'm saying. And because I was focusing so much on the content, I was not really focused on the delivery, and on the connection with my audience, and making small interactions. And I think it's very easy, if you do that, to come across as too robotic or too static, or showing not enough emotions. And I think that's what you need to do, right? On a presentation, even the driest presentation, if you evoke emotion in the audience, it's so much more effective. People will remember your message. And is
Absolutely.
it something you're trying to do as well?
I'm trying to put in more anecdotes in my speeches or tutorials and stories. I feel that's really getting the audience more attentive, and all of a sudden it's also a change from maybe the more practical content, and it's sometimes something that they can relate to, or it's just they're curious, like, oh, okay, what did that company do, even though you're not naming the company, or oh, what did happen to that individual. I feel maybe as humans we're kind of drawn to that storytelling piece. So whenever I introduce one of those stories, I feel people are starting to shift in their chairs and starting to pay attention differently, and then kind of resets their energy level as well. So I feel that helps. And smiling, always making sure that you do have a positive face definitely helps too.
Where do you get the stories? How do you come up? Not really come up with the stories, but are they from your personal life, or are they kind of use cases, or do you take notes while working or traveling, and having a collection of them? Where do you get them?
Yeah, it's a mix of all of these. So sometimes it's me listening to others, or of course from my own experience. I'm part of a couple of professional groups as well, so there's a lot of conversations happening and people sharing their stories. So always try and make note of something that stood up to me, or that if I found interesting, I would assume that, okay, maybe somebody else would find that interesting too. And as with note-taking, I try to, but I'm not so organized at this point to make sure that I have them all in one book or all in one place. So that's a good tip, Gilbert. I should start doing that.
Yeah, I'm happy the question turns out to be a tip.
Do
What
you
yeah.
do you write stories? Do you write different things that you've heard that were interesting?
Yeah, I've become a bit more structured with my stories and content, and I use Notion,
Mm-hmm.
and for me it works really well. So I put all my LinkedIn content, I label it. For example, this post is about business understanding, or this is about asking good questions. This is about data storytelling, so that I get this full database of types of content that I can quickly
Nice.
check on, right?
Nice.
So the data management is in place there. Um, so that really helps me, and I try to. There's also this book called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. I'm not sure if you've actually Ken G recommended it to me. He said it was a really good book, so I
Mhm.
bought it, and the next week I read it. It's really really fun. It's not really about business, but more about storytelling in general.
Mhm.
And this guy has a really great way of explaining things. Of course, everything is through stories, so I would highly recommend that book. And one of the exercises, or one of the things he recommends, is doing homework for life. And what he means with that is writing, at the end of the day, writing down one story about that day. So one thing that happened while picking up the garbage or at work or whatever, it can be very simple.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, of course, the stories might not be very fantastic, but the idea is that you keep on writing them until you see more stories in your life. Because his point is that we have a lot of stories in our lives, but we don't really see them or notice them. And one benefit of that is that you have a lot of stories to take from, but also he says that life slows down. Because if you look back, if I ask you what did you do 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, you probably don't really remember. Maybe even 3 days ago.
Right.
It takes some time to remember.
Right.
So if you have a long list of questions, things that happened, then you have more. Life is kind of longer, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Well, what was the book called again?
It's called Storyworthy by
Storyworthy.
Matthew Dix. Yeah, it's a good book.
Because I've been looking for ways to improve my storytelling technique. So this is a great tip. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, and we talked a bit about hobbies, about creativity, and I know one of your hobbies is surfing as well. Do you see any parallels between surfing and data? What do you like about surfing?
You know what? So first of all, I like water activities. That's one thing. And with surfing, I love waves and just trying to confront them. And I feel like it's a struggle between, man and nature, and especially when they're big and huge and you're trying to get out there. So first, that's a challenge to try and get in a place where you can wait for the wave. And it's a challenge to get there while you have all these waves crashing on you. And then while you're waiting there, you're thinking and strategizing, relaxing a little bit, maybe doing a little bit of quick meditation before the next wave comes, and then trying to catch it, trying to catch that perfect wave, and then balancing on that board. It's not easy, and I'm not that good at it. But just trying every time and seeing how I could get things better the next time is just something that it's exciting me every single time. And even though, again, I'm not a good surfer, I fall every single time. It's just every time I'm looking forward to get back up there. So I really love that balancing act. And maybe that's sort of the connection parallel between surfing and data management, data governance, that it is a balancing act between different things that you have to do at the same time. It's not just one thing. If you just put your foot forward, you're going to tip over. And same with data governance. If you're just going to do one thing and not take care of multiple things at the same time, if you're going to forget about communicating it, the whole thing can flip over and you're going to lose adoption and you're going to lose interest and support from your stakeholders.
Love it. I've done surfing a few times, but I'm sure I'm much worse than you.
I don't know.
We will need to host a competition soon.
Sounds good. Have you used one of those like really long boards, or it's more like California style, what you see in the movies, like shorter board?
Yeah, only the long boards, so the foam boards, right, for
Yes.
beginners that
Yes.
float very well.
Yes.
So it's easier to stand, but you cannot really make any turns.
Right.
But I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also curious to, in work or in life in general, what makes you feel inspired or your best self, or when are you energetic or you feel full of energy and motivation to do something?
I actually, just a couple of years ago, I think I discovered this fact about myself, Gilbert. And what I've figured out is I love to improve things that are already there. And that's not the case in my professional life. In my professional life, I've always created new things from scratch. And that's definitely...
That's what I wanted to ask, yeah, because
right?
I see a big difference there.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm. And that's very rewarding as well, and I'm feeling happy about it. But the process itself, sometimes, it can take a lot out of me. So, for example, even when I'm creating a course, I love it so much more when I'm reviewing what I've created and trying to find ways to improve what I've created. That brings me so much joy, the process itself. Whereas when I'm creating the content of the course initially, it's the end result that makes me happy, not the process of getting there. And same with work. I'm creating a lot of things from scratch, but I love it so much more when maybe I see a policy or I see a standard that's being described, and trying to find ways or poke holes into it and then improve it, than to do it from scratch.
That's interesting to hear. How did you get that insight? How did it come to you? Because it sounds like an insight, and it gave you more self-awareness for the future. How did it came to your mind?
So I did a survey called Strengths Finder.
Right.
And through it gives you your 5 strengths, and one of them was this something that I forgot the wording for it, but basically that's what it was saying. And I was reading, and I was like, you know what, that's so true. Whenever I do review things and try to improve it, or I'm like always trying to improve things, that's what really makes me happy. That's the process that really makes me happy.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so powerful if you learn what makes you happy, what makes you energetic, what makes you feel inspired, because then you can create your life, professional, personal life around it and make changes, right? And I think we keep on discovering stuff, and it's never ending, but that's also the fun about it.
Absolutely.
What are you reading right now? Are you a big reader?
I am a big reader. I'm a even bigger listener. So I have this app where I'm listening to ebooks, and that's because I'm also trying to do some exercise, and at the same time trying to learn something. And it's a lot easier to exercise, which I hate, to be in the gym. I despise it, actually. So trying to get my mind off of it, it's usually while I'm listening to something. So there's a lot of books on tapes that would allow me to do that. But right now, one of the books that I'm listening, I guess it's called Toward a Psychology of Being, which really describes the human nature, and there's different psychologies that are being described, and different views by different psychologists and different philosophers. So it's trying to get a better understanding on how we are, but also how we could be our better self.
That's interesting. The psychology of being, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Good. I'll take a note of that. I'll put it in the show notes. I think it's a good addition. Thank you.
Yeah. It's understanding that human nature. It's very intriguing.
Yeah. And about being your best self and living the life you want, right? Imagine you had $100 million in your bank account.
Mm-hmm.
What would you change to your life, or how would you be surfing 24/7, or what would you do?
I think I would like to travel more. Maybe have multiple homes in different areas of the world where I could go in and know, okay, this is my place, and I can arrange it any way I want. But so I would have some key places that I would always visit, but then I would like to explore new cultures, new countries that I've never been before. So I think that's one main thing that I would change. And otherwise, I thought about this multiple times. I think I would still like to do what I'm doing. and maybe create more, maybe have the option to create more content, put more courses out there, invest more into my YouTube channel. I love that creative part, and maybe also externalize some of the process, like video editing, which takes me a long time and things like that.
Right. And you create a lot, right, already, right? Even without $100 million in the bank account, assuming you don't have that. But but you create a lot, and I'm wondering, because myself, and I've read it many times, I've seen that teaching is the best way to learn. And do you think more people should be creating content or teaching, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. I mean, it's definitely something I'm discovering whenever I'm teaching something, even though I know the subject, or I think I know the subject. When I'm trying to teach it to others, I'm realizing, okay, well, I'm not explaining that in a clear way. It's clear in my head. But then searching for ways to make that more clear, I'm also uncovering things that I haven't known before, or different aspects of it, or looking at it from different angles. So I think you're also enriching yourself when you're trying to teach. And it's not maybe the teaching itself, but how you get there. How do you prepare that material to be taught? I think that's what's really making you learn new things and gives you new perspectives. So yes, I do recommend that. And as for creating content, I think that's, maybe it's not for everybody, but I find that very rewarding too. And it's also beneficial, especially if you're starting a new career, you're putting yourself out there and you're showing, your network and new people that don't know you yet. It tells something about you and what you know. So I think it's highly valuable in the job market as well. Yeah,
I completely agree. Someone asked me, what is the most valuable decision that you've made since you started MindSpeaking? And I told the person, writing on LinkedIn. And actually, I started a bit earlier, just before. But yeah, it leads to so many opportunities if you do it consistently. You learn so much from the feedback as well, from the comments and new perspectives. And I see that coming back in our conversation all the time. Perspectives, right? Moving abroad and getting a new perspective and listening, getting the perspective of the other person. Mm-hmm. And also here, learning is also about a new perspective. Mm-hmm. What I would love to do now is switch gears a bit and have a rapid fire round with some quicker questions. Mm-hmm. And the first one is, what is your favorite place to travel? Because you said you wanted to travel more. So what would be the first place? I would go to Bali. I think I've had the best time over there. It was just so serene and the nature was amazing and people were incredible. I think Bali would be Indonesia. Yeah. Good. What's your number one place, thing, or person that you would go to for learning? Ooh, I would have to say my dad. It's I feel he's all knowledgeable in so many areas. Fantastic. I'd love to learn more about that, but we're in the rapid fire round. Maybe I'll ask it later. What's the first career you dreamed of when you were? When I was a kid, I used to raise my hands up towards the sky when it was night outside, towards the moon, and try and grab it. So my parents thought I would want to be an astronaut or something like that. So maybe that's what it was. But what I remember is I had this little bike at my grandparents' place, and I used to love to get the trash out of the yard. So I wanted to be a garbage man. So you can see the difference. My parents thought I would want to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a garbage man. Yeah, wonderful. I'm wondering if there's any way to combine those two, picking up garbage in the... Yeah, there's a lot of space junk out there for sure. It's a problem. Exactly. Let's get rid of it. The next question is, what are some of the best decisions that you've ever made? So I think going into learning programming, it's something that I wanted to go into marketing. And then, through conversations with my parents, okay, programming. And I thought that was a great decision that I embraced because it gave me a lot of, practical learnings and also a lot of possibilities. So that's definitely one. And then, getting married, I feel that was an amazing decision. I have, my best friend with me.
and also the whole Lights on Data movement and company that I'm trying to grow.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I think it's cool that you also do a lot together with your wife professionally, right? So she seems very supportive. The next question is, if you could turn back the time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Start being active on LinkedIn as soon as it comes out.
Awesome. And the last question is, what job would you be terrible at?
Probably something that has to do with drawing, or a singer. I have a horrible voice. That's something I wish I could sing better. It's one of my dreams. I wish I had a better voice.
Right.
And
you have the
drawing.
microphone.
I have the microphone, exactly. I can play the guitar, but I can't sing. So there you go. I can lip sync. Not as good as Susan though, but.
Awesome. So what I'm curious about is Lights on Data, right? What made you start it and take us on that journey, and where are we now?
Well, it is my wife that pushed me for it, to be honest, and she came up with the name too. So all the credit to her on that end. And I wanted to make sure that what I've learned, I could also give back. So it was a way of giving back to the community. I found it hard for me to come up with some of these things in my professional life. That's why I started to create templates and give them away for free for people to just have something more practical that they could use. I've been to so many conferences and taken courses and to grow my professional career, and a lot of it was just bland and theoretical, and at the end I was like, okay, well, that was interesting, but what am I doing with this information? How can I apply it the next day at work? So taking that, and from my learnings then, after 10 years or so working in data quality, data management, data governance fields, business intelligence, I thought, okay, it's time for me to give back, start to collate all these different artifacts that I've created, and see what I can share from them, because I can't share everything for legal reasons. But yeah, it was just a way to give back, and through that giving back, I've also received quite a bit.
Wonderful. And right now you've contributed a lot, right? If you look on your website, you have a lot of free materials you gave out, and also paid courses. What are some of those courses about, and what type of people could benefit from that?
Yeah, this latest one is called Practical Data Governance Implementation. So it's giving you all the tools and all the steps that you need to put together from scratch your data governance program, or improve the one that you have, because it also comes with a lot of templates that you can just copy paste somewhere, even pre-filled with examples from the real world, and they just show you, I can actually use this, and according to my needs, I can just start filling it in. And it's so much easier than to think of, okay, how would I do a data policy? How would I create this data standard? What should I be able to put in it? So I'm already providing that to you, and if some things don't apply to your company, your own environment, you can just take them out, or just edit it to your own needs. So that's one, but then there's also others on data governance maturity models, that teaching you the different models out there, and which one would be the best for your needs, and one on business glossaries and how to implement one again from scratch. And lastly, I have one with Donabel Santos on data visualization for data storytelling. So that one we're teaching you on all these data visualization concepts and the different charts and how they're best used to create a better data story. Exciting.
Really important topics, and I'm happy to see you contributing so much to, and having the same mission still, contributing and giving back to the community, and so many people are benefiting. So thanks a lot for that. We're nearing the end, and I'm curious to hear what is one big takeaway you want listeners to take away from this episode.
Well, I think that you need to put yourself out there, try and be proactive in what you do. Don't feel afraid to open up, and engage your stakeholders, your audience, your friends, and communicate both ways. Listen and communicate at the same time.
Awesome. I don't want to add too much behind that, because I think it's a great wrap up of this episode. Thanks a lot. Where can people connect with you and find you and follow your work and benefit from your work?
lightsondata.com, or just get in touch with me with George Firican on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. I'll put all the links in the show notes. Thanks a lot. It was a blast. We talked about a lot of topics we haven't really planned, or at least I didn't plan to talk about those, but it was a really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure many people were able to take away a lot. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
And hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you so much, Gilbert.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Do you want people to listen to your data and increase your business impact? Then take my free email course or do the quick self-test of your data communication skills. Go to mindspeaking.com and start learning today.